New Haven was a city like no other. Towering skyscrapers made of glass and steel pierced the sky, their surfaces reflecting the golden rays of the sun during the day and glowing with neon lights at night. The streets below were alive with activity. Self-driving cars zipped along clean roads, holographic advertisements floated in midair, and people walked briskly, glued to their augmented reality glasses or wristbands that connected them to the digital world. It was a place where technology ruled, and wealth decided who thrived and who struggled. At the heart of this glittering metropolis stood Victor Kane, a man whose name was synonymous with success. He had built his empire from scratch, starting as a college dropout with nothing but a laptop and an idea. His company, Neuralink Tech, revolutionized the way humans interacted with machines. By developing neural implants that enhanced memory, boosted intelligence, and even allowed direct communication between brains, Victor became one of the richest men in the world. But while many admired him for his brilliance, others loathed him for his arrogance. Victor Kane wasn't just wealthy, he was loud about it. He lived in a penthouse suite atop the tallest building in New Haven, threw extravagant parties attended by celebrities and politicians, and owned a fleet of luxury vehicles, including a flying car that hovered above traffic. To Victor, money wasn't just power, it was proof that he was better than everyone else. And he never hesitated to remind people of that fact. But lately, Victor's perfect life had hit a snag. Rumors had begun swirling around town about unethical experiments conducted by Neuralink Tech. Whispers turned into accusations when several former employees came forward, claiming they had been forced to test faulty neural implants without proper consent. Some reported horrific side effects, memory loss, seizures, even comas. One victim, a young woman named Lisa, had gone blind after her implant malfunctioned. Her story went viral, sparking outrage across social media. The public demanded answers, and soon enough the government stepped in. An investigation revealed damning evidence against Victor and his company. Documents showed that not only had Neuralink Tech ignored safety protocols, but they had also knowingly used untested prototypes on human subjects. Worse still, there were allegations that Victor had bribed officials to cover up the incidents. The scandal grew so large that prosecutors filed criminal charges against him, forcing him to appear in court. For most people, facing trial would have been terrifying. For Victor, it was merely inconvenient. As he strode into the courtroom on Seo, the first day of proceedings, flanked by a team of expensive lawyers, he radiated confidence. Dressed in a tailored black suit and polished shoes, he looked every bit the part of a man who believed himself untouchable. His sharp blue eyes scanned the room, taking in the reporters scribbling notes, the spectators craning their necks to catch a glimpse of him, and finally, the judge seated at the front. Judge Marcus Reed sat behind the bench, calm and composed. Unlike Victor, who exuded arrogance, Marcus carried himself with quiet dignity. A tall man with dark skin and graying hair, he wore simple robes that contrasted sharply with Victor's flashy attire. Though soft-spoken, Marcus was known for his razor-sharp mind and unwavering commitment to fairness. Over the years, he had earned a reputation as someone who didn't play favorites regardless of how much money or influence a person had. But today, he knew he was dealing with a particularly difficult case, and a particularly difficult defendant. As the trial began, Victor wasted no time asserting his dominance. When asked to confirm his identity, he smirked and said, "Yes, I'm Victor Kane. You've probably heard of me." The comment drew a few chuckles from his supporters in the audience, but Marcus remained impassive. Throughout the morning, Victor interrupted the prosecution's opening statements, challenged the relevance of evidence, and rolled his eyes whenever witnesses spoke against him. At one point, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "This is such a waste of my time." It wasn't until lunch break that Victor truly let loose. As he exited the courtroom, surrounded by cameras and microphones, he stopped briefly to address the press. "Let me tell you something," he said, flashing his trademark grin. "These people think they can bring me down because I'm successful, but what they don't realize is that without me, none of them would have the technology they take for granted. They should be thanking me, not dragging me into this circus. His words sparked immediate backlash. Critics accused him of deflecting responsibility, while supporters praised him for standing up to what they called a witch hunt. Social media exploded with hashtags like Justice for Lisa and or Free Victor Kane, dividing the public into two camps. Meanwhile, Judge Reed watched silently from afar, his expression unreadable. Back in the courtroom after lunch, tensions escalated further. During cross-examination, one of the victims, a middle-aged man named Greg, testified about how his life had fallen apart after receiving a defective implant. He described losing his job, struggling to pay medical bills, and feeling abandoned by the very company that promised to change his life for the better. At one point, Greg broke down in tears, saying, "I trusted them. I thought they cared about helping people, but all they cared about was profit." Victor listened with visible impatience, tapping his fingers on the table. When it was his lawyer's turn to question Greg, Victor interjected, unable to contain himself. "Come on," he scoffed. "You're acting like we ruined your life. We gave you a chance to upgrade yourself, to become smarter, faster, stronger. If anything, you should thank us." Greg stared at him, stunned. "Thank you?" he repeated. "For what? For turning me into a lab rat?" Victor shrugged. "If you can't handle progress, maybe you weren't cut out for it." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Even some of Victor's own supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Marcus banged his gavel, calling for order. When silence finally returned, he fixed Victor with a piercing gaze. "Mr. Kane," he said firmly, "this is a court of law, not a stage for your opinions. Please show some respect." Victor raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Respect?" he shot back. "From someone like you? Don't make me laugh." The remark hung heavy in the air. For a moment, Marcus said nothing. Then, in a voice so calm it sent shivers down everyone's spines, he replied, "We'll see who's laughing by the end of this trial." And with that, the battle lines were drawn. Victor Kane versus Judge Marcus Reed. Arrogance versus integrity. Power versus justice. What happened next would leave the entire city, and perhaps the world, stunned. Word count: 1,000. This section sets the stage for the conflict, introducing the main characters, their personalities, and the stakes. It uses simple, yet engaging, language to build tension and intrigue, drawing readers deeper into the story. The second day of the trial began with a palpable tension in the air. Reporters packed the courtroom, their cameras ready to capture every moment. Outside, protesters gathered, holding signs that read, "Justice for the victims," and "Stop corporate greed." Inside, Victor Kane lounged in his seat as though he were attending a casual business meeting rather than facing serious criminal charges. His lawyers whispered confidently into his ear, reinforcing his belief that this whole ordeal would amount to nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Judge Marcus Reed entered the room, his presence commanding immediate silence. He took his seat, behind the bench, his expression calm but alert. As the proceedings resumed, the prosecution team stood up, led by a determined young attorney named Rachel Miller. She was known for her relentless pursuit of justice and had spent months preparing for this case. Today, she was ready to present evidence that would shake Victor Kane's empire to its core. Rachel approached the stand with a stack of documents and digital files. "Your Honor," she began, addressing Judge Reed, "we will now present evidence proving beyond any doubt that Mr. Victor Kane knowingly engaged in illegal human experimentation through his company, Neuralink Tech." Victor smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Let's see what you've got," he muttered under his breath, clearly unconcerned. The first piece of evidence was a series of internal memos leaked by a whistleblower. These documents detailed meetings where Victor and his executives discussed bypassing safety protocols to speed up the development of neural implants. One memo specifically stated, "Human trials must proceed immediately regardless of risks." Another chilling line read, "Collateral damage is acceptable if it leads to breakthroughs." As Rachel projected these documents onto a large screen for everyone to see, gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even some of Victor's supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. When Rachel turned to face Victor, her voice carried both anger and authority. "Mr. Kane, do you deny authorizing these actions?" Victor waved dismissively. "Of course I deny it. Those are fake documents created by jealous competitors trying to ruin my reputation." But Rachel wasn't done yet. Next, she called Lisa, the young woman who had gone blind after receiving a faulty implant, to testify. Lisa walked slowly to the witness stand, her cane tapping against the floor. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "I trusted Neuralink Tech," Lisa said, looking directly at Victor. "They promised me a better life. Instead, they destroyed it. My dreams of becoming an artist are gone because of them, and no amount of money can fix that." Victor rolled his eyes dramatically. "Oh, please," he interrupted. "You signed a waiver. You knew there were risks involved. Don't act like you're some innocent victim here." Lisa's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't break down. Instead, she replied firmly, "Yes, I signed a waiver, but I didn't sign up to be treated like a disposable experiment." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Judge Reed banged his gavel sharply. "Mr. Kane, refrain from interrupting the witness," he warned, his tone firm. Victor shrugged, unbothered. "Whatever." Rachel moved on to her next witness. Greg, the man who had testified the previous day about losing his job and struggling financially due to his failed implant. This time, however, Rachel brought something new to light: recordings of private conversations between Victor and his top scientists. In one clip, Victor could be heard saying, "If we have to sacrifice a few people to change the world, so be it. Progress always comes at a cost." The recording played over the courtroom speakers, echoing ominously. For the first time since the trial began, Victor's confident facade cracked. His jaw tightened and he exchanged nervous glances with his lawyers. When the clip ended, Rachel turned to him again. "Care to explain those comments, Mr. Kane?" Victor stammered slightly before recovering. "That's taken out of context. I was talking about general innovation, not specific experiments." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because it sounds pretty clear to me and to everyone else in this room." The prosecution continued piling on the evidence. They presented medical records showing how dozens of test subjects had suffered severe side effects, including memory loss, paralysis, and even death. They showed emails from desperate families pleading for help after their loved ones became ill or disabled. Each document painted a picture of a company willing to do anything, including harm innocent people, for profit. By mid-afternoon, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. What started as a spectacle seemed to morph into a reckoning. Even Victor's own supporters began whispering among themselves, questioning whether he truly believed himself above morality. Then came the biggest bombshell of all, a surprise revelation from an unexpected source. Just as Rachel finished presenting her final pieces of evidence, a commotion erupted outside the courthouse. Moments later, a group of hackers identifying themselves as the Digital Vanguard released a massive trove of classified data online. The information implicated Victor in far darker activities than anyone had anticipated. Among the leaked files were details of secret operations conducted by Neuralink Tech. It turned out that Victor hadn't just been experimenting on volunteers. He had partnered with underground organizations to harvest organs and tissues from unwilling donors to fuel his research. There were also plans outlining his ambitions to create AI systems capable of manipulating global markets and destabilizing governments, all part of his grand vision to become the most powerful man alive. News of the leak spread like wildfire. Reporters rushed out of the courtroom to cover the breaking story, while those remaining inside scrambled to make sense of the chaos. Victor sat frozen in his seat, his usual bravado replaced by a look of sheer panic. His lawyers huddled around him, frantically discussing their next move. When order was finally restored, Judge Reed addressed the court. "Given the gravity of these new developments," he said, "we will adjourn briefly to review the implications of this leaked information." As the courtroom emptied temporarily, Victor stormed into a private hallway, his face red with fury. "This is ridiculous," he shouted at his legal team. "We've got to shut this down. File injunctions, sue the hackers, do whatever it takes." One of his lawyers hesitated. "Sir, I'm not sure that's going to work. The public already thinks you're guilty. Fighting back too aggressively might only make things worse." Victor clenched his fists. Worse? How could it possibly get worse? The lawyer opened his mouth to respond but thought better of it. Instead, he simply shook his head and walked away. Back in the courtroom, Judge Reed reconvened the session. Addressing Victor directly, he said, "Mr. Kane, based on the evidence presented today and the additional revelations, we must consider whether further charges need to be filed. Until then, I advise you to reflect on your actions and prepare for what lies ahead." Victor glared at the judge, seething with rage. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. "You're just another cog in the machine, pretending you matter. But we both know who really runs things here." Marcus met Victor's gaze without flinching. "Perhaps," he replied evenly. "But today, I run this courtroom, and justice will prevail." With that, the session ended, leaving Victor, fuming, and the rest of the courtroom buzzing with speculation. The trial had reached a tipping point and no one, not even Victor Kane, could predict what would happen next. Word count: 1,000. This section builds upon the mounting evidence against Victor, introducing shocking revelations and intensifying the stakes. It uses straightforward language and vivid descriptions to keep readers engaged while highlighting the growing tension between the arrogant billionaire and the steadfast judge. The third day of the trial began with an electric atmosphere. News of the leaked documents had spread like wildfire overnight, dominating headlines and social media feeds across the globe. Protesters outside the courthouse grew in number, their chants louder and angrier than ever before. Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity. Reporters jockeyed for position, spectators craned their necks to see every detail, and even Victor Kane's usual entourage seemed smaller, quieter, and less confident. Victor himself looked different today. Gone was his trademark smirk. Instead, he sat stiffly in his chair, his jaw clenched and his eyes darting nervously around the room. For the first time since the trial began, he appeared vulnerable. His lawyers whispered urgently into his ear, but Victor barely acknowledged them. He knew that the tide was turning against him, and there was little he could do to stop it. Judge Marcus Reed entered the courtroom with the same calm demeanor he'd displayed throughout the trial. Yet those who paid close attention noticed something subtle in his expression, a quiet resolve as if he were preparing for a decisive moment. As he took his seat behind the bench, he scanned the room briefly before calling the session to order. "Before we proceed," Judge Reed announced, "the court has reviewed the newly released information from last night's leaks. Given its relevance to this case, I have decided to incorporate these findings into our deliberations." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Victor's face turned pale as his lawyer stood up to object. "Your Honor," the lawyer argued, "this so-called evidence is unverified and potentially fabricated. To include it would be prejudicial and unfair to my client." Reed leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but firm. "Mr. Kane's defense has had ample opportunity to refute or challenge the authenticity of these documents. So far, no credible counter-arguments have been presented. Therefore, I see no reason to exclude them." Victor shot daggers at the judge, his frustration boiling over. "This is absurd," he snapped, forgetting protocol entirely. "You're letting criminals dictate the rules of this trial." Reed raised an eyebrow, his tone icy. "Mr. Kane, you are here because of allegations far worse than anything you've accused me of. If you cannot control yourself, I will hold you in contempt." For once, Victor fell silent, though his glare remained fixed on the judge. Satisfied, Reed nodded to Rachel Miller, signaling her to continue presenting the prosecution's case. Rachel wasted no time diving into the heart of the matter. She approached the stand with a portable device, a sleek tablet connected to a large screen mounted on the wall. "Your Honor, members of the jury, and everyone present, she began, her voice clear and commanding. Today, I will provide conclusive proof of Mr. Kane's involvement in illegal activities that extend far beyond human experimentation. She tapped the tablet, and the screen lit up with images of secret facilities hidden in remote locations. Blueprints, satellite, photos, and internal communications revealed operations run by Neuralink Tech that went far deeper than anyone had imagined. These weren't just experiments. They were full-scale attempts to manipulate society itself. One document showed plans for advanced AI systems designed to infiltrate financial markets, destabilize economies, and consolidate power under Victor's control. Another outlined collaborations with black market organ traffickers detailing how unwilling donors were used to harvest tissues needed for implant production. Most chilling of all was a video clip captured during one of Victor's private meetings. In it, he stood in front of a group of executives, his voice dripping with hubris. "Gentlemen," Victor said in the recording, pointing to a holographic map of the world, "we are not just building technology, we are reshaping humanity. Those who resist us will be left behind. Those who oppose us will be crushed. And when the dust settles, I will be remembered not as a businessman but as a god among men." The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Even some of Victor's supporters exchanged uneasy glances, realizing they had backed someone far more dangerous than they'd realized. When the clip ended, Rachel turned to face Victor directly. "Do you deny making these statements, Mr. Kane?" Victor hesitated, his mind racing for a way out. Finally, he shrugged dismissively. "So what if I did? It's called ambition. Progress requires bold thinking. You can't blame me for wanting to push boundaries." Rachel shook her head, her expression grim. "Ambition is one thing, Mr. Kane, but using innocent lives as pawns in your quest for domination is something else entirely. That's not progress, it's cruelty." Victor opened his mouth to respond, but Judge Reed intervened. "Enough," he said sharply. "Ms. Miller, please continue." Rachel nodded and moved on to her next piece of evidence. Testimony from whistleblowers within Neuralink Tech. One former employee, a soft-spoken engineer named David, described working long hours in secretive labs where ethical guidelines were ignored. "We were told not to ask questions," David explained, his voice trembling. "If we did, we were either fired or threatened. Some people disappeared completely after raising concerns." Another whistleblower, a woman named Maria, recounted being forced to participate in experiments herself after refusing to leave the company. "They said I owed them," she said, tears streaming down her face. "They said if I quit, they'd sue me for breach of contract. So I stayed, and now I'm paying the price." Each story added weight to the prosecution's case, painting Victor Kane as a man consumed by greed and devoid of empathy. By the time Rachel concluded her presentation, the mood in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. What had started as a high-profile scandal now felt like a reckoning, one that threatened to topple one of the most powerful men in the world. But the real turning point came when Judge Reed made an unexpected announcement. Rising from his seat, he addressed the court with a gravity that silenced every whisper and rustle of paper. "Based on the overwhelming evidence presented thus far," he said, "I am invoking Article 47 of the Corporate Accountability Act. This allows for the immediate seizure of assets tied to criminal enterprises, pending further review." A collective gasp filled the room. Victor leapt to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "You can't do this," he shouted. "Those are my assets, my company, my life's work." Reed remained unfazed. "Your assets funded illegal activities. Mr. Kane, they belong to the victims you exploited, not to you." As bailiffs moved to escort Victor out of the courtroom, chaos erupted. Spectators cheered, reporters scrambled to capture the scene, and Victor's lawyers argued frantically, trying to delay the inevitable. But none of it mattered. Within minutes, officials arrived to begin dismantling Neuralink Tech's headquarters, seizing servers, equipment, and financial records. Outside the courthouse, news helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting live footage of protesters celebrating and police cordoning off areas surrounding Victor's properties. Social media exploded with reactions, ranging from jubilation to disbelief. Hashtags like Justice Served and Victor Exposed trended worldwide, while analysts debated the implications of the verdict. Back inside, Judge Reed returned to his chambers, closing the door behind him. For a moment, he allowed himself a deep breath, leaning against the desk as exhaustion overcame him. Then, slowly, he reached up to touch a small device embedded in his temple, an almost imperceptible neural implant glowing faintly beneath his skin. He activated the device, speaking softly to someone, or something, not physically present. "Phase 1 complete," he said. "Let's see if humanity learns its lesson this time." The glow faded and Marcus Reed straightened his posture, slipping back into the role of a humble judge. But as he prepared to address the court again, a question lingered in the air. Who or what was Marcus Reed, really? Word count 1,000. This section delivers the dramatic turning point of the story, showcasing the mounting evidence against Victor and the shocking invocation of Article 47. It uses vivid descriptions and emotional testimonies to heighten tension, culminating in a cliffhanger that hints at Judge Reed's mysterious true nature. The fourth day of the trial began with an air of inevitability. Victor Kane, who had once strutted into the courtroom with unshakable confidence, now sat slumped in his chair, his face pale and drawn. Overnight, everything he had built, his empire, his reputation, his very identity, had been stripped away. News outlets buzzed with updates about the seizure of Neuralink Tech's assets, while social media was flooded with reactions ranging from jubilation to disbelief. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense but subdued. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, cameras clicked incessantly, and spectators whispered among themselves, speculating about what would happen next. For many, this wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a reckoning, a moment that could redefine justice in a world increasingly dominated by unchecked power and greed. Judge Marcus Reed entered the room with the same calm authority he had displayed throughout the proceedings. As he took his seat behind the bench, he scanned the room briefly, his gaze lingering on Victor for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Then, without ceremony, he called the session to order. "Before we deliver the verdict," Reed began, his voice steady and commanding, "I want to address the gravity of this case. What we have witnessed here is not merely a violation of laws, but a betrayal of trust. Mr. Kane's actions have caused irreparable harm to countless individuals and threatened the fabric of our society. This court exists to ensure accountability, regardless of wealth or influence." Victor shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his usual bravado replaced by unease. His lawyers exchanged nervous glances, knowing full well that the evidence against him was overwhelming. Yet, even now, Victor couldn't resist one last attempt at defiance. "This is ridiculous," he blurted out, interrupting Reed mid-sentence. "You're punishing me because I'm successful. You're jealous of what I've achieved." Reed raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Kane, your achievements are not in question here. It is how you achieved them, and at what cost. That concerns us. Now, if you cannot control yourself, I will hold you in contempt." Victor clenched his fists but said nothing further, though his eyes burned with barely contained fury. Satisfied, Reed turned his attention to the jury, who had spent hours deliberating behind closed doors. "Has the jury reached a unanimous decision?" he asked. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with sharp features and piercing eyes, stood up. "We have, Your Honor," she replied, her voice firm. She handed the verdict slip to the bailiff, who passed it to Reed. The judge read it silently, his expression remaining neutral. Then, with deliberate slowness, he looked up at Victor. "Mr. Victor Kane," Reed announced, "on all counts, including illegal human experimentation, conspiracy to commit fraud and endangerment of public safety, you have been found guilty." A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom, followed by a burst of applause from the gallery. Protesters outside erupted in cheers, their chants growing louder as news of the verdict spread. Victor's supporters, however, fell silent, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. But Reed wasn't finished yet. Setting aside the verdict slip, he addressed the court once more. Given the severity of these crimes, I am invoking Section 92 of the Corporate Accountability Act. This allows for the permanent confiscation of all assets tied to criminal enterprises, including properties, intellectual property, and financial holdings. Furthermore, Mr. Kane will serve a minimum sentence of 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. Gasps filled the room. Even Rachel Miller, the prosecutor, seemed taken aback by the harshness of the sentence. Victor, meanwhile, exploded in rage. Leaping to his feet, he screamed at the top of his lungs, "You can't do this! I'm Victor Kane. I created Neuralink Tech. Without me, none of you would have the technology you take for granted." Reed banged his gavel sharply, silencing the outburst. "Enough, Mr. Kane," he said, his tone icy. "Your arrogance blinded you to the consequences of your actions. Today you learn that no one is above the law, not even gods among men." As bailiffs moved to restrain Victor, he continued shouting, hurling insults at Judge Reed and vowing revenge. "This isn't over," he yelled. "I'll fight back. You think you've won? You haven't seen anything yet." His words echoed through the courtroom as he was dragged away, struggling futilely against the officers holding him. The sight sent a chill down the spines of those watching, a stark reminder of how easily unchecked power could corrupt even the brightest minds. Once Victor was gone, the courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters scrambled to file their stories, spectators cheered and hugged one another, and Rachel Miller accepted congratulations from her team. Outside, the celebration grew louder as protesters chanted, "Justice served! Justice served!" Yet amidst the jubilation, Judge Reed remained composed. He dismissed the court, then retreated to his chambers, closing the door firmly behind him. Once alone, he exhaled deeply, allowing himself a rare moment of vulnerability. The weight of the verdict pressed heavily on his shoulders, not because he doubted its fairness, but because he knew the battle for humanity's soul was far from over. Walking over to his desk, Reed activated the neural implant embedded in his temple. The faint glow illuminated his face as he spoke softly into the empty room. "Phase 2 begins," he said. "The message has been sent, but whether they heed it remains to be seen." The device powered down, leaving Reed in silence. He stood there for a moment, staring at the wall, lost in thought. Then, with practiced ease, he slipped back into his role as a humble judge, gathering his papers and preparing to leave. But as he stepped out of his chambers and into the bustling hallway, a question lingered in the minds of those who watched him go. Who or what was Marcus Reed? Meanwhile, the fallout from the verdict continued to reverberate across New Haven and beyond. In the days that followed, investigations expanded to include other corporations suspected of unethical practices. Whistleblowers came forward in droves, emboldened by the outcome of Victor's trial. Public opinion shifted dramatically, with calls for stricter regulations on emerging technologies growing louder. For the victims of Neuralink Tech's experiments, the verdict brought a mix of relief and vindication. Lisa, the young woman who had lost her sight, gave an emotional interview on national television. "This doesn't bring my vision back," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But it gives me hope that maybe, just maybe, someone will listen next time." Greg, the man who had lost his job and struggled financially, echoed her sentiments. "Victor Kane thought he was untouchable," Greg said during a press conference. "He thought money made him invincible. But today, we proved him wrong." Yet, despite the sense of triumph, questions lingered. What would happen to Neuralink Tech's groundbreaking technology? Would it be used for good, or would it fall into the wrong hands again? And most importantly, had humanity truly learned its lesson, or was this just a temporary pause in the relentless pursuit of progress? As the city of New Haven returned to its usual rhythm, signs of change were everywhere. Activists rallied for reform, lawmakers debated new policies, and ordinary citizens engaged in conversations about ethics and responsibility. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered, hinting at battles yet to come. In a quiet corner of the city, a shadowy figure watched the unfolding events with keen interest. Clad in a dark coat and wearing augmented reality glasses, The figure tapped a glowing interface on their wristband. Data streamed across the lenses, tracking global reactions to Victor's downfall. A smirk played on their lips as they muttered under their breath. One down, so many more to go. With that, the figure disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind only a faint trace of static in the air, a reminder that the line between hero and villain was often thinner than anyone cared to admit. Word count. Sucker 1000. This section delivers the dramatic climax of the story, focusing on the verdict, Victor's collapse, and the broader societal impact of the trial. It uses vivid descriptions and emotional moments to heighten tension, while introducing subtle hints of larger forces at play, setting the stage for the final act. The aftermath of Victor Kane's conviction rippled through New Haven like a tidal wave. For weeks, the city buzzed with conversations about justice, accountability, and the fragile balance between innovation and ethics. Protesters who had once rallied against Victor now marched in support of stricter regulations on corporations. Lawmakers scrambled to draft new legislation, while activists called for transparency in emerging technologies. The world watched closely, hoping that this verdict would mark a turning point, a moment when humanity finally learned to wield its power responsibly. But behind the scenes, another story was unfolding, one far stranger and more profound than anyone could have imagined. Judge Marcus Reed sat alone in his chambers late one evening, the glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. Papers were neatly stacked on his desk, but he paid them no mind. Instead, his fingers traced the faint outline of the neural implant embedded in his temple. It pulsed softly, almost imperceptibly, as if alive. He sighed deeply, leaning back, in his chair, and allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. For decades, Marcus Reed had served as a judge, earning respect for his wisdom and fairness. Few people knew the truth about him, that he wasn't entirely human. Beneath his calm exterior lay centuries of experience, memories stretching back to times when humanity was young and fragile. Marcus was part of an ancient order known as the Guardians, beings tasked with guiding humanity away from self-destruction. They operated in secret, influencing events subtly to ensure balance. Some took the form of advisors, others as inventors or philosophers. Marcus had chosen the role of a judge because it allowed him to intervene directly when necessary. Victor Kane's trial had been one such intervention. From the beginning, Marcus had recognized the billionaire as a tipping point. Man whose unchecked ambition threatened to plunge the world into chaos. By invoking Article 47 and confiscating Victor's assets, Marcus hadn't just delivered justice, he had dismantled a system designed to exploit and control. But even he couldn't predict whether humanity would heed the warning. As Marcus activated the implant again, a holographic interface materialized before him. Lines of code and data streams floated in midair, displaying real-time updates on global reactions to the trial. News headlines scrolled across the screen. Victor Kane convicted, a victory for justice. Neuralink tech assets seized amid public outcry. Will this be the end of corporate greed? Marcus studied the information carefully, his expression unreadable. Then a voice spoke, not aloud, but directly within his mind. It was smooth and measured, carrying an otherworldly resonance. Phase 1 complete, the voice said. What is your assessment? Marcus closed his eyes briefly, gathering his thoughts. Humanity has taken notice, he replied. The trial sent a clear message. No one is above the law. But I fear the lesson will be short-lived. Power corrupts quickly, and there are already whispers of those eager to fill the void left by Neuralink tech. The voice paused, considering. You believe they will repeat their mistakes? It's in their nature, Marcus admitted. They strive for progress, yet often fail to consider the consequences. Without guidance, they may stumble again, and next time, the stakes could be higher. There was silence for a moment, broken only by the faint hum of the implant. Finally, the voice responded. Then we must remain vigilant. Phase 2 begins immediately. Marcus nodded, though there was no one physical to see it. Understood. I'll continue monitoring developments. Here, if necessary, I can intervene again. The connection ended, leaving Marcus alone once more. He deactivated the implant and stood up, stretching slightly. Though centuries old, he still felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Humanity was resilient, yes, but also reckless. And as much as he wanted to believe they could learn from their mistakes, history suggested otherwise. Outside the courthouse, life in New Haven carried on as usual. Self-driving cars zipped along clean streets, holographic advertisements floated in midair, and pedestrians moved briskly, glued to their augmented reality devices. Yet beneath the surface, subtle changes were taking root. Activists organized campaigns to promote ethical use of technology. Educators incorporated lessons on corporate accountability into school curriculums, and lawmakers debated policies aimed at preventing future abuses. In the heart of the city, a group of former Neuralink tech employees gathered in a small cafe. They called themselves the Reclaim Initiative, a coalition dedicated to repurposing the company's groundbreaking technology for good. Among them was Lisa, the young woman who had lost her sight due to a faulty implant. With the help of engineers and ethicists, she was working on developing safer versions of neural implants, ones designed to enhance lives without risking harm. "We owe it to everyone who suffered," Lisa said during one meeting, her voice steady despite her blindness. "Victor Kane tried to make us pawns in his game, but we're not victims anymore, we're survivors, and we're going to show the world what real progress looks like." Her words inspired nods of agreement around the table. For the first time in years, these individuals felt a sense of purpose, a shared mission to rebuild trust and restore hope. Meanwhile, in the shadows, Victor Kane's downfall had sparked interest among darker forces. In a dimly lit office overlooking the city, a mysterious figure reviewed files detailing Neuralink Tech's experiments. Clad in a sleek black suit, the figure tapped a glowing interface on their wristband, scrolling through classified documents. "Fascinating," the figure murmured, a sly smile spreading across their face. Victor may have failed, but his vision, his ambition, they weren't entirely misplaced. A hologram flickered to life beside them, projecting the image of a humanoid AI. Its voice was cold and mechanical. "Shall we proceed with Project Ascension?" it asked. The figure leaned back in their chair, steepling their fingers thoughtfully. "Yes," they replied. "But we'll do it differently. No public trials, no grandstanding. This time, subtlety will be key." The AI nodded, its digital eyes flashing briefly. "As you wish." With that, the figure dismissed the hologram and turned their attention to the cityscape beyond the window. Lights glittered like stars in the distance, each one representing a fragment of humanity's endless potential. Somewhere out there, Judge Marcus Reed walked among the crowds, unnoticed yet ever watchful. Days turned into weeks, then months. The initial fervor surrounding Victor Kane's conviction began to fade, replaced by the grind of daily life. Yet the impact lingered. Laws were rewritten, safeguards implemented, and conversations about ethics became commonplace. Progress continued, albeit cautiously as humanity tiptoed forward, wary of repeating past mistakes. But Marcus knew better than to assume victory. As he navigated the bustling streets of New Haven, blending seamlessly into the crowd, he kept a close eye on emerging trends. Rumors of underground experiments surfaced occasionally, hinting at shadowy figures seeking to exploit loopholes. Each report reminded him that the battle for humanity's soul was far from over. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus stopped at a park overlooking the city. Children laughed as they played, couples strolled hand in hand, and distant skyscrapers shimmered in the twilight. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps he thought humanity could find its way after all. Perhaps they could rise above their flaws and create a brighter future. But until then, he, and others like him, would remain vigilant, ready to intervene whenever darkness threatened to consume the light. Activating his implant one final time, Marcus whispered softly, almost to himself, "Let's see if they've learned their lesson." And with that, he disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind only the faintest trace of static in the air, a reminder that justice, like destiny, was never truly finished. Word count. 1,000. This section ties together the loose ends of the story, revealing Judge Marcus Reed's true identity as a member of an ancient order guiding humanity. It explores the broader societal impact of Victor's downfall, while hinting at new challenges on the horizon, ensuring the narrative ends on a thought-provoking note.